he's that draft nerd dude that I like having on. What's going on, dude? How are things out on the island other than Barry Trotz being awesome as always?
How's it going, Nestor? I mean, it's crazy over here with the Islanders. I mean, everybody's kind of swept up in the fever, especially after the sweep of the Penguins. I mean, they look great. I mean, everybody's excited to see what this team could do now that they have a coach, a goaltender, and just some really good players all around.
They got a GM, too, by the way, too. He's pretty good, too.
Yeah,
so.
They do. Yeah, a little bit.
Put together an all-star team up there on the hockey side. It has made my wife and I start to look at busing to Barclays next week for potential caps. So we'll see. But I'll get on to the puck in a moment. We have the NFL draft. That is why you're here. Give everybody your background on being a draft nerd before we get going here, because I have about 5 guys like you in my life. By the way, Dan Jeremiah was one of them many moons ago. You know, Mike Mayock used to come on my show when he was hosting the Ravens show 15 years ago. He's now running the draft for the Raiders. So I've got some good stock here, including the Phil Savages but I'm not like focused on it 24 hours a day here. I'm doing a thing called Baltimore Positive because our city's burning down. I don't know if you've heard that part, Nick, in our mayor's situation. So I'm involved in that. But the draft thing here, because we're picking 22nd, because we don't have a second round pick, it's a little quiet a little bit, for Ozzy having stepped down in our market. And I feel like we're all going to dive in next week. But this has been the least immersed I've been in a draft in a long, long time. I don't have a board this year. I am bored with the board, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I hear you. And I mean, part of it is a little bit with the Ravens draft position. I mean, they're picking, in the mid-20s, they're picking 22nd. So, and this draft is very defensive heavy. So if you're looking for a defensive player like, the Jets and the Giants are up here, you're in luck. But for a team that's kind of picking down that far, like the Ravens, and a team that in particular needs a little bit of offensive firepower, there's not really too much you're going to be able to really look at and get super, super excited about. I mean, there are going to be some great players available around there, but it's not like you're picking, in the top 10 and you have your pick of some quality edge rushers or defensive linemen or off-ball linebackers.
Well, the Ravens are a unique team now anyway, right? Having jettisoned Flacco, all the changes on the defense, really a heart transplant with Earl Thomas coming in, Suggs, Mosley, Weddle, all gone now. Where they are with the maturation of Judon and Brandon Williams and the back end stacked. I mean, I probably don't say that enough because we spent years here trying to figure out the back end of the secondary during the Flacco era where 2 touchdown leads didn't hold up in New England. But Humphrey, Smith, for what the back end represents and the way they've drafted, now it's about building an offense in a completely unorthodox way. And for a guy like you that likes to study all the teams and put together draft boards, the Ravens are the most unique team because they're going to want different kinds of players in this offense than maybe other teams want. And they're going to value offense, wide receivers who can crack down and block and be physical, tight ends, which clearly they gave a very nice, handsome contract to Nick Boyle, and what they're going to want to do with fat backs and Mark Ingram, and what they're probably going to want to do out of the center and the guard position, having upped and re-upped Marshall Yanda and re-inspired him to say, let's go crack some skulls 45 times a game and run the football.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Ravens are kind of, in a way, almost throwing it back with their offense. They have a very run-first philosophy. They brought in Mark Ingram, as you mentioned. Lamar Jackson is a threat to take it any touch to the, any touch for a score. But they don't really have any receivers. I mean, you look at who they have returning, it's basically Willie Snead and Chris Moore, and they combined for 2 touchdowns and something like 800 yards last year combined, which doesn't really, it's not great. But like I said before, there'll be some receivers available. There's, if you're looking for a big physical receiver in this class, you're in luck because there are quite a few that, should be around at that 22nd pick. Offensive line, that also in that range, you'll have a couple of guard, center, interior lineman kind of types that'll be around. And even if you are looking for something on defense, I know the Ravens have Patrick Owasso at middle linebacker. I know they're high still on Kenny Young, but maybe there's a couple of maybe more of second round, but then maybe end up moving up a little bit into the back end first round. Maybe some guys like Mack Wilson out of Alabama who can kind of fill the C.J. Mosley role a little bit.
Well, you said moving back, right? And the Ravens have been pretty deft at that. The Patriots have been deft at that. And even in moving up last year, the deftness of drafting in the 32nd spot and grabbing Lamar Jackson and getting an extra year out of a quarterback, which last year was sort of a freebie. They jettisoned Flacco, got rid of the deal. They're going to take a little bit of cappage, here this year for him and for some of their other transgressions, but picking up sandwich picks, into the future as well, going face up with John Harbaugh and having a real coach instead of taking on a young project and trying to build this thing differently where I think their thought is they're going to want different wide receivers than other teams. And to your point, maybe backing up into drafting a couple of times on Friday night instead of once and giving away Thursday night would put them in a position to maybe get different kinds of players and value them differently. But to your point, backing up. Everybody wants to back up all of a sudden, right?
Right, yeah, and I always say this whenever, especially when Giants and Jets fans always say, I don't want to take a quarterback at 6, or I don't want to take this edge rusher at 6. They should trade back and get more picks. And to that, I always say, okay, great. Who are you trading back with? It always takes 2 to tango. But if you're picking in the top 6, it's a little tougher because you're always going to want a king's ransom for those picks. If you're picking the top 10, you're asking for a first rounder, maybe next year's first rounder or a second rounder. But if you're picking 22nd or 23rd or in that back half of the first round, it's a little bit easier to kind of move up and down the board because it's not as cost prohibitive. So a team like the Ravens, who do need some additional picks, they'll be able to kind of finagle, maybe trading back a little bit into, maybe 30, 31 range. If, let's say, the Packers or the Rams are dead set on picking up an offensive line prospect. Maybe they trade back with them and then pick up a second rounder or an extra third or a combination of both even. But it's a little bit easier for them to move back because, like I said, the cost isn't as high for a team in that back half of the first round to move back a little bit more with a team that's also already back there.
Nick Klopsis does all things draft coverage at Newsday Sports. You can follow him at Nick Klopsis. That's Klopsis. He's up on the island and celebrating all things Barry Trotz at this point and awaiting the draft like all the rest of us. All right, let's just get through the Kyler Murray thing, but let's talk about some players in this draft in the first round that you like that that are the names in the buzz. I mean, the first one around here would be Metcalf, right? I've seen him mocked in this direction. I've seen him gone before. One-dimensional. I've heard all of these different things about him, but he's a guy that we've talked about a little bit here in the need for wide receiver and where we are, but there's a whole bunch of things that would have to happen above for those stars to align as far as I can tell. Yeah,
I mean, Metcalf right now, he's the top receiver on my board, just because of that sheer freak physical ability. Anytime you can run how he hit it at the combine in the 4.3s at that size, that's going to turn some heads. It's just a matter of he's not very flexible. He's not he's almost like kind of a one-trick pony where, his best attribute is just really running a 9 route, running, deep, which could suit the Ravens well. Lamar Jackson is a strong-armed quarterback. He does have to work on his accuracy, but he can flick the ball, 50, 60 yards down the field with ease. So maybe a guy like Metcalf who can just, beat someone at the line of scrimmage with his size and then just blow down the field would be a good fit. The problem is, like you said, he might not be available at that time. Washington could use a wide receiver. I mean, if they're not going to go with a quarterback, if they're going to stick with Case Keenum kind of as the one-year option, maybe they look at DK Metcalf as someone to help rebolster their receiver corps. Maybe someone even a little bit later would take him. So you're kind of thinking maybe he might not be available, but there are some other options. You have his Ole Miss teammate, A.J. Brown, who doesn't have this pure size or pure speed that Metcalf has, but he's more polished route runner. He does have some size, so he doesn't have to necessarily play in the slot, even though he excelled there at Ole Miss. You have a guy like Hakeem Butler, also a guy who tested very well at the combine in terms of size. Not necessarily the speediest guy, but he's a very physical guy. You have a guy like Arizona State's N'Keal Harry, who's basically like an Alshon Jeffrey 2.0, someone who can, outbox receivers in the red zone area and come down with contested catches.
And by the way, all these wide receiver options you're mentioning, Ravens better get one of these cats, right? I mean, and they only have one pick in, the first day and a half, kind of, sort of, right? So figuring this out that's the tall test, because if you don't come out with one of these guys, what do you come out with? Because the veteran wide receiver, the Crabtree thing, the Macklin thing, we've been down that road around here. I don't know that that's a great selling point, and I don't know that you're going to sell Antonio Brown to come and want to play in this offense. So, and I talked to John Harbaugh about that at the combine, or excuse me, at the owners' meetings a couple weeks ago. It is interesting, but you're mentioning all these names. I do hope one of these guys winds up in purple.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be options there at receiver. I mean, it's a good receiver class, but there isn't really anybody who's a lock to go really that high. So, like we were saying before, you could see a situation where Metcalf could potentially be available. But even if he's not available, there's still quality guys. You mentioned Antonio Brown before. Maybe the Ravens decide to go after his cousin, Hollywood Brown, Marquise Brown. He's not the big physical guy that the Ravens are really looking for. He's pretty much like Antonio Brown in his own right.
Is he on social media?
Oh, yeah.
Nice. I don't want him. He is Nick Klopsis. One other name, Devin Bush. There's a name that came up, late visit to the Ravens, middle of the week. Michigan, the Harbaugh connection. I mean, I think anytime there's a Michigan or an Alabama thing, there's some level of intrigue given the tentacles of the organization here.
Right, yeah, and Devin Bush is a phenomenal player. I mean, the more I watched of Devin Bush, the more I watched of Michigan in general, watching Rashawn Gary or Chase Winovich or any of the other prospects, Devin Bush always just popped off the tape, and there was something every single time that I watched him that I'm like, wow, I didn't notice this before, but he's really good at insert thing here, whether it's, he's really good at, the only real knock he has is just that he's a little bit undersized. He's only really 5'11", but he plays bigger than that. He plays physical. He plays, he's good in coverage. He's speedy. And because of that, he's kind of risen up to the board where I'm not even sure he might even be available. He might go in the top 15. I mean, there are a couple teams at the back end of the top 10 that, barring whether or not they take a quarterback, I mean, I'm looking at Denver and Cincinnati at 10 and 11. If they don't end up trying to find their quarterbacks of the future, they might end up going linebacker because those are big positions of need. Devin White, the guy from LSU, will be long gone by the time the Ravens pick. And that might be long gone by the time those two pick. So Devin Bush might be that second option for them. So if he was available and I was Eric DeCosta or John Harbaugh, I'd run up to the podium with that name on the card and not look back. But if he's not available, like I mentioned before, this would be more of an Ozzie Newsome pick if he was around because of the Alabama connection. But Mack Wilson would be a good pick. He's kind of he's talked about a little bit more as a day two guy. But like you said, if the Ravens end up trading back or maybe they decide, we can't risk getting this guy. We have to take him in the back half of the first round. He's not a bad player either. He's also pretty well-rounded. A little bit more so as a better coverage guy than as a pure downhill run stopper. But he's good in coverage, and he just needs to show a little bit more consistency. He'll have some big plays, and then he'll kind of disappear for a little bit at times. But he's a good player in his own right, too, and he could be someone to kind of fill that hole in the heart of the defense alongside Owasso and Kenny Young.
Nick, the one thing we haven't talked about is that number one pick in Kyler Murray and Nick Bosa, and who's going to the Hall of Very Good. And it feels like 5 minutes ago we were talking about Josh Rosen, right?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I'm still high on Josh Rosen. Whether or not the Cardinals end up taking Kyler Murray and ship Josh Rosen elsewhere. The more you hear coming up to draft time, the more you kind of think that maybe Kyler Murray is the guy for them, and it makes sense on the connecting the dots level. Cliff Kingsbury tried to recruit Kyler Murray out of college, Steve Keim was kind of, non-committal about Rosen when asked about him at the Combine. He gave him the dreaded "he's our quarterback right now" label, which you never want to hear that. Anytime you hear the words "right now," that just sets off alarm bells for any position, especially quarterback, though. And Murray, I think of Murray as like this. He's like Lamar Jackson as a prospect in terms of the dynamic speed, the ability to take any sort of play to the house, but he's much more polished as a passer. So he's kind of like what you're hoping Lamar Jackson will be down the line. So he definitely warrants, a very high pick. If I was a general manager, would I take him first overall? I'm not 100% sure, just because you mentioned before, Nick Bosa, Quinnen Williams, there are some quality defensive guys that will really, tip the scales on defense for you that you could use that might be worth a little bit more as the first overall pick.
He is Nick Klopsis. He is at Newsday Sports, and you can find him out on Twitter at Nick Klopsis. That's Klopsis. We'll give a retweet as well as we get ready for the draft. Always enjoy our annual visit, and word to the wise for anybody watching the draft next week. They'll be having some fun down there in Nashville, Tennessee, and I use it, Nick, to sort of get refreshed, right? I sit there all week. I'm going to miss Mayock, I'll tell you that much, but I'll have my eyes on my man Mel, and we'll be watching everything and learning about all 32 places and learning about how the Browns are going to win the Super Bowl this year.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You mentioned Mayock. I mean, definitely, I'm excited to see what he does as a GM now that he's with Gruden over in Oakland. But you mentioned Jeremiah before. Jeremiah has really picked up the slack for them as now. He's always done a phenomenal job with them, but now that he's kind of in that limelight as their number one draft guy, he's phenomenal. I'm excited to watch him.
I remember when Dan used to take
NFL.
my calls. I'm going to give him a hard time about that after the draft. So, hey, man, be well. Great having you on. And, hey, maybe you and me at the Barclays Center in the Gorton Fisherman sweaters.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Let me know.
There he goes. Nick Klopsis from Newsday Sports up on the island where Barry Trotz is kicking ass and taking names in the name of Al Arbor. Nasty at WNST.net finds me, the buy at Toyota.com audio vault there 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We come in crystal clear. The kids call it podcasting on the island. We call it the buy at Toyota.com audio vault here at WNST.net. Morning newspaper ships at 7 a.m. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Always $5 down, $10 a month. Planet of Triumphs will get you inspired. I got my wife on the treadmill in here at 6 o'clock in the morning getting me inspired, but you can go to Planet Fitness, get inspired there as well, and Planet of Triumphs as well. There's one a block away from where I live. There's one right around the corner from you as well. The Maryland Jockey Club sponsoring our morning newspaper. The entries in the front of WNST.net as well as in our morning newspaper. You can subscribe online, and we'll see you down at Laurel as we get ready for Derby and Preakness at Hi-Ho Pimlico. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I am on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram and streaming live on our Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. And if there's any breaking news at all, you get it first on the WNST Tech Service. That is brought to you by Coons Ford Security Boulevard. Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5. I'm going to join him as we get ready for the draft. We are beginning Baltimore Positive very, very soon, wrapping up the loose ends and moving forward to try to make Baltimore better. You're going to be hearing a lot about that. We'll make you sick of Baltimore Positive. Maybe you'll get on board. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.